It's 2:17 a.m. Smoke slowly fills the air. The cigarette burns quietly between your fingers. Outside, the city is silent. Inside, your screen glows with market charts. Gold is moving again tonight, not dramatically, just a slow climb. Gold has survived wars, inflation, and collapsing currencies. For thousands of years, it has been the ultimate safe asset. But history reveals something strange. In some of the most desperate moments ever recorded, gold stopped functioning as money, and cigarettes took its place. Which raises a fascinating question. When real crises arrive, what actually holds value? There's a pattern that repeats quietly through history. It doesn't show up during boom times. It doesn't show up when markets are calm and optimistic. It shows up when systems begin to strain. When trust weakens, when currencies behave strangely, when people slowly start realizing that the financial rules they relied on for decades might not be as permanent as they believed. Those moments reveal something important about value, because money, despite how stable it appears, is actually a fragile agreement. A paper bill only works because people trust the system behind it. A number inside a bank account represents wealth because institutions are still functioning. But when that confidence begins to shake, people instinctively start looking for something more durable, something that holds value even when systems change. For thousands of years, that answer has often been gold. Gold is one of the few assets that has moved through entire civilizations. Ancient Egypt valued it. The Roman Empire minted coins from it. Medieval kingdoms stored it in vaults. And today, modern central banks still hold massive reserves of it. Gold doesn't corrode. It can't be printed. It doesn't depend on political promises, which is why investors often move toward gold during periods of uncertainty. You can see that behavior repeating throughout modern history. During inflation shocks, during currency crises, during major geopolitical conflicts, gold tends to rise when confidence begins to weaken. And lately, if you've been watching the markets carefully, you might have noticed something interesting. Gold has been climbing again. Quietly, not in a dramatic spike, but in that slow, persistent way that often suggests something deeper is happening beneath the surface. Now, that doesn't mean catastrophe is around the corner. History doesn't unfold according to predictions. But experienced observers know that global tension sometimes appears in subtle ways before it becomes obvious. Supply chains shifting, energy markets reacting to distant conflicts, defense budgets increasing across multiple nations at the same time, political alliances quietly adjusting. None of this guarantees a global crisis, but it does remind us that stability is something the world has to constantly maintain. And whenever uncertainty grows, investors start asking the same old question again. What survives if things go wrong? That question is what brings gold back into the conversation again and again. Because gold is designed for long-term stability. It stores wealth across decades, across generations. But history contains a strange twist that most people never think about. In the most extreme situations, when systems stop functioning entirely, gold sometimes loses its practical usefulness. Not because gold stopped being valuable, but because the priorities of human behavior suddenly change. When people are worried about survival instead of wealth, their decisions become very direct. Food becomes valuable, fuel becomes valuable, medicine becomes valuable, and strangely enough, cigarettes often become valuable too. This might sound bizarre at first, but economists studying extreme environments have documented it many times. One of the most famous examples comes from prisoner of war camps during World War II. Inside those camps, traditional money didn't exist. There were no banks, no functioning currency, no financial infrastructure. Yet trade still emerged. Prisoners exchanged goods. They assigned prices. They negotiated value. And gradually, one item became the center of the camp economy. Cigarettes. Cigarettes were portable. They were divisible. They were recognizable. And perhaps most importantly, people wanted them. Even prisoners who didn't smoke understood they could trade cigarettes for something else. Food rations could be priced in cigarettes. Chocolate could be priced in cigarettes. Small services could be exchanged using cigarettes as payment. Over time, a full market system formed around them. Economists later studied these environments and discovered something fascinating. Even without institutions, humans instinctively create systems of exchange. They assign value to whatever objects satisfy immediate demand. In those camps, cigarettes happened to meet that requirement. And this pattern didn't stop with wartime prisons. It has appeared repeatedly throughout history, in black markets, in collapsed economies, in refugee camps. Whenever traditional currency stops functioning, people adapt. They trade whatever holds value in the moment. Sometimes that's cigarettes, sometimes it's fuel, sometimes it's food. The pattern always reveals something deeper about human behavior. Value isn't fixed, it changes depending on circumstances. Gold represents one type of value, long-term wealth preservation. Cigarettes represent another type, immediate trade during instability. Both forms of value appear in different environments, and understanding that difference is important when thinking about the future. Because not every crisis looks the same. Some crises are financial. Banks struggle. Currencies lose purchasing power. Markets fall. But society continues operating. In those situations, gold tends to perform extremely well. Investors use it as protection against inflation and monetary instability. But in more extreme situations, where systems break down completely, human priorities shift. People trade what they can use immediately. Objects become valuable not because they are rare, but because they solve problems in the moment. And that's when ordinary items sometimes take on extraordinary roles. Which brings us back to this quiet moment. In the middle of the night, the cigarette has nearly burned out, just a small ember glowing in the darkness. On your screen, the gold chart is still open, still moving slowly upward, two very different forms of value. One built to survive centuries, the other built to survive chaos. And history shows that both have played their roles when systems were pushed to their limits. Because the truth about money is simpler than most people think, value is never just about scarcity. It's about what human beings need when the world changes. That's where we'll leave things today. If this is the first time you've come across this channel, you might want to stick around. Most people look at markets on the surface, but here we look for the patterns underneath them, the quiet signals, the strange historical lessons, the things that only a small group of observers tends to notice. There are still many layers of this system left to explore, and some of the next ones might surprise you even more. Until the next one, take care.